Camus' existentialism is not the one of anxiety, made heavy with the burdens of self-creation and freedom. It's the existentialism of the open window, the philosophy that invites authenticity and allows you to hear what the world has to say to you specifically. Even for a man on death row, that's enough. There's a moment in The Stranger that stops if you're paying attention. Meursault is sitting outside his mother's funeral home on the night before her burial, and he notices the smells, the colours of the countryside, and the sound of dogs barking somewhere in the distance. His mother has just died. He's sitting vigil, as tradition requires, with complete and undefended openness. He's just there, present to the world, taking it in without the usual filters of guilt, grief, and the emotional performance they often entail. As he sips his coffee and puffs on his cigarette, he watches the light change. This is one of the most misread passages in modern literature. The standard reading of Meursault has calcified into a flat and emotionally deficient character over 70 years of the novel being taught in literature and philosophy classes. Most people read him as cold and alienated, a cautionary illustration of a man who forgot how to feel. If you read him through this lens, the funeral scene is damning evidence. His mother is dead and he's drinking coffee, noticing the countryside. What kind of person does that? But that reading misses something enormous. It misses the fact that in that moment, Meursault is practicing the lost art of presence, which is something many of us have forgotten how to do. He is radically, bodily, immediately present to the world in front of him, without the mediation of narrative or anxiety or social performance. He's in a state of noticing without labelling. The smells are really there, and the light is really changing, and the world is really there for him. He's grieving the way children do, totally inside his experience, with no one to perform for, least of all himself. It's an innocent state, and one which makes space for the world to embrace him and rescue his soul. Albert Camus published The Stranger in 1942, and it arrived in a world that was already halfway through destroying itself, in a philosophical climate dominated by the darker strains of existentialism. There was a general sense that confronting the absurdity of human existence was necessarily a grim, claustrophobic, and inward-facing affair. This was largely propagated by Sartre's nausea and Heidegger's anxiety, both of them renowned existentialists. But Camus did something different, and he showed us a different kind of existentialism. He wrote a novel about the absurd that was full of sunlight and sea and the smell of the Mediterranean summer. His protagonist is misread as a sociopath and a nihilist, but I want to argue that he's one of the most truly alive characters in 20th century fiction. Not in spite of his detachment from social convention, but because of what that detachment reveals. A soul that has remained stubbornly, embarrassingly open to the actual world. This video is about what Camus is really doing in The Stranger. It's about two kinds of existentialism, the grim and the joyful, and what they each offer us. It's about what joy actually means, as opposed to the thin, performative happiness that modernity packages and sells. And it's about why Meursault's particular way of being in the world is a strange and hypnotic invitation to experience the world at face value. It's an invitation that has become more urgent now that we've built an entire civilization around the project of insulating ourselves from our own experience. Existentialism, as most people encounter it, is a philosophy with a weather problem. It's permanently overcast. The canonical images all form clouds. There's Sartre's nausea, that visceral, physical revulsion at the sheer contingency of existence, to the fact that things exist without reason or necessity, and without any consideration for whether you wanted them to. There's Heidegger's angst, the free-floating dread that opens up when you finally confront the fact of your own mortality. It morphs from an abstract tradition into a lived reality, where the ground drops away beneath you, and your assumptions drop with it. And then there's Kierkegaard's despair, the dizziness of freedom, the vertigo of being the kind of creature that has to choose its own existence without a script. These ideas are important, and they carry a certain truth that lives inside us all. But taken as a totality, they produce a philosophy that makes you want to hide in a dark room and shut the curtains. Camus, on the other hand, tells us to open the curtains and let the sun shine through. He's usually grouped with the existentialists, which he formed a friendly resistance to over his lifetime. He remained fully committed to confronting absurdity, but differed in his response to it. Where Sartre concluded from the absurdity of existence that human beings were condemned to a kind of anxious, self-creating freedom, Camus' conclusion was more generous. He saw the absurdity of existence as grounds for celebration. Out of the indifference of human meaning inevitably came dread, but also something kinder, a bracing, visceral, overwhelming joy. Camus thought that the right response to the fact that nothing means anything is to really notice the things in front of you, because they're really all you have, and they're actually quite astonishing. In Being and Nothingness, Sartre told us that existence precedes essence. We arrive in the world without a pre-given nature, without a role assigned to us by God or biology or culture, and we are therefore radically responsible for everything we make of ourselves. This is a profound and liberating thought, and also, in Sartre's hands, an exhausting one. The subject of Sartrean existentialism is self-creating. It's a kind of life that involves constant work, and it's always enduring the labour of its own existence. It's the philosophical equivalent of someone who can't sit still. One way of viewing Meursault is as someone who can't be bothered. He's the least Sartrean protagonist imaginable, but this isn't a failure of his character. Instead, it's the source of his peculiar wisdom. He doesn't agonize over his choices, and he doesn't treat his own identity as work. He views it as a gift, and endeavours to just exist in the most literal sense. He has a way of being fully present in the world, taking it in and responding to it as it comes. He's passive, but not in the cowardly way we're used to imagining. Camus bestows on him an openness to existence itself, a receptivity rather than a project. And his message is one that the most activist strains of existentialism has no room for. Think of it this way. Sartrean existentialism is like a man who goes to the beach and spends the whole time deciding what kind of swimmer he's going to be, what his relationship to the ocean will mean about him, and whether he's the kind of person who swims for pleasure or exercise. What does it say about his authentic self if he prefers the shallows? But Meursault just gets in the water. The novel shows us that the second man has grasped something the first one is missing. Camus called his own position absurdist rather than existentialist, and it's an important distinction. Absurdism is not a philosophy of meaning. It has nothing to say about the purpose of life or human destiny, and it makes no cosmic claims. It agrees with the existentialists that the universe is indifferent. There's no God in the sky handing out scripts for the plays of our lives, and we aren't contingent creatures in a contingent world. But its conclusion from these facts is quite different from its sister philosophy. Camus published The Myth of Sisyphus in the same year as The Stranger, and in it he makes his argument explicitly. Sisyphus is condemned to roll his boulder up the hill forever, and it rolls back down every time. This is the human condition, and we must imagine Sisyphus happy. It's a demonstration of the harmony between absurdity and happiness. They're not in conflict, and in fact they even coexist. Yes, the rock, the sun, and the effort it takes to roll the rock up the hill are all real. But Camus insists that Sisyphus doesn't have to shy away from that realness. The sheer, particular, immediate reality of the experience is enough. This is Camus' joyful existentialism, and The Stranger is its story. The first thing you notice about Meursault's way of experiencing the world is how physical it is. He doesn't describe his emotional states, or rather, when he does, it's with a difference bordering on bewilderment. He sees emotions as things that happen to him from the outside, like weather, rather than things he creates and has to manage. This allows him to bravely face the world in all its intensity. He's painfully and joyfully aware of the sheer physicality of the world, noticing the heat of the sun and the glare of the sea in a way that seems foreign to us. He describes the palpable silence in his mother's village in the afternoon. He notices the weight of his own body in a chair, the texture of a cigarette, and the coldness of a beer. Sartre had a concept for this: being in itself, the mode of existence that belongs to inanimate things. Objects just are what they are, without consciousness or choice or the ability to question. In Sartre's scheme, this is the lower mode of being, an obstacle that humans should be trying to override with our self-awareness and choices. But Camus, through Meursault, is suggesting something that Sartre's framework can't account for: that the body's immediate, unreflective engagement with the physical world might be a loophole to joy. Rather than an obstacle to authentic experience, this is its most direct form. A man who really feels the sun on his face, who lives inside that experience instead of reporting on it to create an image of himself, is more truly present to existence than the man who is always translating his experience into categories. On the morning of his mother's burial, Meursault noticed that the sky was already filled with sunshine. It was going to be a scorcher. I hadn't been out in the country for a while, and I could feel how much I'd enjoy going for a walk if it hadn't been for Maman. The parenthetical is shockingly honest. It's glaringly obvious to him where his guilt should be, but he refuses to perform the grief that would block out the world. The sky, the sunshine, the body's knowledge of what it wants. Later, swimming with Marie the day after the funeral, he is fully there, in the water, in the pleasure, in the physical reality of the morning. From the outside, this might look like callousness, but we get to see inside, into a man whose soul is still open to the touch of the world, who hasn't built the usual defensive structure between himself and what is happening. The philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty, writing in the same mid-century moment as Camus, argued that Western philosophy had made a catastrophic error by treating the body as a vehicle for consciousness, rather than as consciousness's primary form. His phenomenology of perception is the philosophical argument for what Meursault enacts novelistically, that we don't first think and then feel. We don't first form an idea of the world and then encounter it. We encounter it first, through our bodies, in the immediate lived experience of being a creature with senses and longings. The mind catches up afterwards. For Camus, our bodies are not just containers. They're our first and most fundamental mode of being in the world. Meursault is almost purely Merleau-Pontian. He's a body that knows. And the things his body knows, the cold water, the smell of summer, and the pleasure of an evening cigarette, aren't shallow or trivial things. They're the world's letters addressed directly to him, and he's a man who wants to read them. It's worth looking at this as something more than just an interesting philosophy, because nowadays it's increasingly rare. We have built a civilization whose primary achievement is the insulation of the self from the sense. We've progressively shut ourselves off from the world around us. We sit in climate-controlled rooms, looking at screens that show us representations of the world rather than the world itself. We eat processed food that has been engineered for homogeneity and predictability, rather than food that surprises us with its variable seasonal reality. We experience the world through a layer of abstraction, through other people's images and narratives, rather than through our own senses. We've been doing exactly the opposite of what Meursault does. We've been building walls between ourselves and the direct encounter with the real. The result is exactly what you would predict from Merleau-Ponty's framework, a progressive weakening of the soul's capacity to be truly present, and commonly to the point of atrophy. The person who lives primarily through screens doesn't experience more of the world. They experience a simulation of the world, which is a totally different thing, and it produces a totally different kind of person. Someone who is more curated, more managed, more defended, and correspondingly less alive. Even as he's in prison, confined to a cell and awaiting his execution, Meursault retains a quality of presence that most people walking free in the digital world have already surrendered. He watches the square of sky above his cell, and notices when it changes. He notices how the sounds he hears change throughout the day. He's still fully inside his experience, not performing it or retelling it from the outside. Camus is telling us that this is worth fighting for. This will probably come as news to you, but joy and happiness are not the same thing. Our culture has forgotten the meaning of the word joy, and when we've lost a word for something, we tend to forget the thing itself. Happiness is what the wellness industry sells. It's the smooth, frictionless state of having your needs met, your preferences catered to, and your environment optimized for comfort. It's the emotional equivalent of a hotel room. Pleasant, inoffensive, and designed to produce no strong reactions of any kind. It's a state you can maintain, sort of, depending on a bit of luck and money, and your algorithm serving you the right content. But nobody tells you that this kind of happiness is profoundly unsatisfying in the long run, because it's utterly devoid of texture. Without resistance and intensity, there's no real meaning to be found. No engagement with anything real, and no story worth telling. Joy is something else entirely. Joy is what you feel when you're fully present and fully alive, and you're seeing the world as it is. It's when the intensity of the moment breaks through your management of it and reaches you directly, without the usual filters. And it's not always pleasant, sometimes quite the opposite. It can arrive in grief, exhaustion, or fear, as easily as in delight. What makes it joy rather than just sensation is the kind of presence it demands of you. Joy is always knocking, but to answer the door you have to be fully there, fully attentive, and fully engaged. C.S. Lewis described it as an unsatisfied desire which is itself more desirable than any other satisfaction. It's the feeling of really being alive, and it's just as likely to come from standing in the rain as it is from the fireplace that warms you up afterward. Meursault knows joy in this sense, and the novel is full of it. He meets joy when he swims with Marie in the cool morning sea. It sings to him in the character of summer evenings in Algiers, the smells and sounds of a neighbourhood settling into night, and it confronts him in the rough texture of a towel on sunburned skin. These aren't all happy moments, and Meursault is not a particularly happy character in the conventional sense, but they are moments of profound presence, of genuine contact between him and the world around him, and Camus renders them with a warmth that bestows on them the quality of grace. Unexpected, unearned, and freely given by a world that doesn't owe it. The romantic poet John Keats had a concept he called negative capability, the capacity to remain in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after the fact and reason. What he meant was the ability to be inside an experience and just sit with it, not explaining it or using it, or even trying to make sense of it. This is the artistic disposition, but I think it's also the description of what Meursault does with his life. He's negatively capable in his relationship to existence. Fact and reason are kind of alien to him. He lets the world speak to him in all its unexplained, unexplainable particularity, and he listens to it. The scene at the end of the novel, with the prison chaplain, is one of the most extraordinary pieces of prose we see from Camus. What happens to Meursault here is the full realization of his philosophy. As he's waiting to be executed, he has been visited over and over by a priest who wants him to repent, to find God and to make it all square, to do the appropriate emotional and spiritual work that his situation seems to demand. But Meursault keeps politely declining. He's not interested in God. He's interested in the world. He knows he doesn't have much time left, and he wants to make sure he hears the rest of what the world has to say to him. Finally, the priest pushes Meursault to breaking point. He says, "As if that blind rage had washed me clean, rid me of hope, and looking up at the dark sky spangled with its signs and stars, I opened myself to the gentle indifference of the world." It's a beautiful phrase, and it's a memorable one too. This is a man who has faced the world at its most absolute, serene indifference to his fate. It should be devastating, but somehow he finds it liberating. Because the world's indifference also means the world's availability. It's the only thing that has behaviour without agenda, affordance without judgment, and no expectation that he performs his role the right way. And in that indifference, he finds something that feels very much like being held. He describes the moment as if that blind rage had washed me clean. This is the language of catharsis, of spiritual clearing. It's what the priest was trying to offer him with confession and absolution, but he finds it in a different place. In the out there rather than the up here. Meursault opens himself to the world's indifference and is startled by its tenderness. "I felt that I had been happy," he says, "and that I was happy still." On the eve of his execution, he's happy. This isn't the kind of happiness the wellness industry wants to sell you. He's happy in the way of a man who has finally and completely let the world in. That kind of happiness can't be bought. It's joy, and it's what Camus shows us how to find. You won't find it by optimizing your productivity or by building a perfectly Instagrammable life. You won't find it easily, but when you do, it will be simple. First, you have to open yourself. To let the world mold you and shape you. Not by collecting it into yourself, but by offering yourself up to it. That's the whole trick. Opening. As Meursault discovers, it's available even in the most unforgiving circumstances. Even in a prison cell, in the hours before death. The world is the only thing you can count on to always be there for you. And it's the only thing you can count on to always be enough. We need to talk about what we're doing to ourselves. The average person in the developed world now spends somewhere between 6 to 10 hours a day looking at screens. And that's not including work. 6 to 10 hours a day consuming content, scrolling, streaming, and reacting. 50 years ago, if you'd have told someone that for 6 to 10 hours a day someone isn't engaging in the real world, they would have assumed you're describing a disability or an incapacitation. Like describing someone who spends 6 hours a day staring at the wall. That doesn't seem too far off. Because that's what the screen ultimately does, no matter what's on it. It interposes a layer between the person and the world. It gives you a representation of experience rather than experience itself. No matter how compelling they are, representations are no comparison for the actual world. They can't give you the smell of the sea. Grief and the way it sits in the chest like weather can't be learned or moved through via screens. They can't give you the feeling of cold water on a hot day, or the way the light moves at 6 in the evening in summer, or the sound of a voice in the same room as you. They can certainly gesture towards these things. They can remind you that such things exist. But the reminder is only a signal, and not the thing itself. When you spend enough time with reminders instead of reality, your capacity to listen to the life of the world, to really feel it, slowly atrophies. Camus would have recognized this immediately. Meursault's entire moral dignity, his quality of remaining open to the world, is based on his dismissal of the intermediary. He has no interest in explaining the world to himself. He doesn't want to narrate his life, or separate things into manageable categories. He just wants to be there, directly, ready to receive whatever may come. You can't separate his directness from his dignity. Without it, you don't get Meursault anymore. You get the court that condemns him, the society of people who have replaced direct experience with conventions about how experience should be performed, and who find Meursault monstrous because he won't do it. Albert Borgman, writing in Technology and the Character of Contemporary Life, described what he called the device paradigm, the way modern technology consistently removes us from the engagement and effort that gives activities their meaning, replacing the full experience with a streamlined output. The fireplace that used to imply the ritual of cutting wood and building a fire, all the effort and embodied skill that made warmth a memorable achievement, is replaced by a thermostat. You can have the comfort of the warmth without the satisfaction of the fire. Borgman argues that this loss is not trivial. That ritual was part of the warmth, part of the special, sacred life of the fire. Strip it away, and what remains is only a commodity, pleasant but empty. Our relationship to the internet and to screens is a device paradigm taken to its logical extreme. Every dimension of life that used to require presence, effort, and embodied engagement has been partially or fully replaced by a frictionless digital simulacrum. Conversation, entertainment, and community have been traded in for access, convenience, and connection across distances that used to be impossible. Useful, yes, but worth it? We've only just begun to understand what we've lost, and it's something I think many of us can feel, myself included. We've lost the resistance to the actual world, its weight and smell and heat and difficulty. It turns out that friction is just what the soul needs to gain its strength. Meursault is a friction character. He insists on it, not wanting to smooth over the difficulty of his mother's death with the appropriate performance of grief. He won't smooth over the complexity of his relationship with Marie with conventional declarations of love, and he won't smooth over the reality of having killed a man with a convenient narrative of passion or self-defense. He just sits with the facts as they are, despite the crushing weight of them, and he tries to be honest with himself. His courageous character is intolerable to the priest and to the neighbours who testify against him, because his honesty exposes something ugly. The elaborate machinery of social performance which everyone around him uses to cope. But Meursault refuses to pretend the fire is just warmth. There's a reason Camus set the novel in Algeria and in summer. The physical intensity of the setting isn't just for decoration. The heat is almost a character. The sun presses down on everything with a physical force, and the sea offers bodily relief, not just simulated refreshment. If you pay attention, the world really is like this, and that's the novel's argument. The world presses and insists, and demands a physical response. It takes discipline and cultivation to be able to respond to the pressure, and to stay open to the world, but it is possible. Camus is telling us that the person who can do this is the one who has kept their soul intact. Viktor Frankl, who we encountered in an earlier video with Man's Search for Meaning, made a related observation about the concentration camps. Despite the conditions, a precious few of the prisoners managed to maintain their psychological health. They were distinguished by this quality of presence, in solidarity with the people around them and to whatever small beauties were available, like a sunset visible through the camp fence, or the way the sunlight danced on the snow. A remembered piece of music, played through the mind where it can't be stolen. Frankl noticed that the people who could do this, who could receive beauty even in catastrophic circumstances, who stayed open to the world, survived better. In psychological terms, they suffered less than those who couldn't. The soul needs the world, and whenever it's ready to listen, the world has glorious tales to tell, even in a concentration camp. We've built a set of circumstances which are tuned to encourage us to close ourselves off, to retreat into flat comforts, and to escape. We sit in our climate-controlled rooms with our blue-lit screens, and we tell ourselves we're more connected than the generations that came before us. And in one narrow sense, we're right. We have access to more information, more entertainment, more conversation, more images of more places and people than anyone in history. But connection without presence isn't true connection at all. And presence, the radical, bodily, immediate presence to the actual world that Meursault finds even in a prison cell, is what our souls are longing for. The question Camus was asking, which is also the question our moment demands, is what happens to a person who has forgotten how to be present? What kind of life is possible for someone who has chosen convenience and the path of least resistance so often that they've become a spectator in their own life? Thankfully, the novel gives us an answer in the life of the crowd at Meursault's trial. These are people who will easily condemn a man for not crying at his mother's funeral. For them, the deliberate performance of emotion is so thoroughly naturalized that a lack of it signals the presence of evil. They have lost the capacity to tell the difference between the real and the performed, because they've spent so long performing that they've forgotten there was ever anything else. But there's another question, and I think it's the most important. It's one that the court and the chaplain are both trying to answer in different ways. It's the question of meaning. Do our lives matter? Is there a why? And if there isn't, at least in a cosmic sense, then why do we feel shortchanged? How can our lives and our experiences feel so significant? The traditional answer, the answer that the priest represents in the novel, is that meaning is given from outside. It descends from God, who has passed down the moral order, from the narrative of salvation and redemption. Our lives matter because we're all part of a story that's bigger than us. It has a conclusion, and the conclusion is good. This answer has been a true comfort throughout human history, but Camus rebukes it. In his view, it's a false comfort, and not available to someone who has confronted the indifference of the world. Meursault's perspective shows us that there's a particular strength to be earned by someone who's willing to stay in the room with the fact of that indifference, rather than filling it with God. It's demanding, but it's honest. Sartre's answer is that meaning is made, not found. We choose our values and create our purposes, constructing the significance of our lives through the exercise of freedom. This is heroic and really quite admirable. But anyone who has sat alone at 3 a.m. knows that underneath, it's exhausting. The self-created meaning has to be continuously maintained, tended to like a fragile garden. It's a project that never ends and never arrives. Camus offers something different. Not meaning given, and not meaning made. Something more like meaning received. The meaning that comes from opening yourself to the actual world, and letting it have more freedom than you do. On the eve of his execution, when Meursault says that he had been happy, and was happy still, he's not making a claim about metaphysics. He's describing an encounter with the world, where he looked upon its face and listened to its secrets. He's been genuinely present in his own unique and unrepeatable life, and that has offered him his own joyous meaning. Not because he chose it, and not because God assigned it, but because that's what presence does. No amount of metaphysical architecture can substitute the significance, the danger, or the barefaced joy that the real world is waiting to show you. This is, I think, the most important thing Camus is saying, and the most urgently relevant. Anywhere you look, there's someone telling you we're in a meaning crisis. The data on loneliness, depression, and the sense of emptiness that afflicts wealthy, comfortable, ostensibly well-off people in developed countries is overwhelming. We've more or less solved the material problems that previous generations spent most of their energy on. We have food and shelter, and we barely have to lift a finger to entertain ourselves. But we feel, in extraordinary numbers, that our lives are without significance, that nothing quite matters, and that the whole thing is just for show. Camus uses the novel to embody a conclusion that he doesn't name explicitly. We've made a category error about where meaning comes from. We've been looking for it in the narrative, in the story we tell about our lives and what they're ultimately for. But the kind of meaning that's really worth looking for, the lived and felt kind, doesn't live in the narrative. It lives in the encounter, in the moment when you're fully present, when the world calls to you and you listen, even if you don't know how to answer. It lives in the hot coffee, in the blue sky, and the conversation with the person sitting across from you. It awakens not just your mind, but your senses too. Meaning isn't what happens at the end of the story. It's what surprises you in the middle, when you forget you're even telling one. I too felt ready to start life all over again, Meursault says, in the final pages when he's about to be executed, and he means it. He has lived a life full of absurdity, made too many mistakes to count, and through it all has found the unapologetic quality of presence. He understands now that this life has been enough, more than enough, because it's been his own. And the fact that the universe did not assign it significance doesn't diminish it. He found the significance in the joyful living of it. It was in the coffee at the vigil, and the swim with Marie, and all the evenings he spent on the balcony looking out at the street with the warmth of the Algerian sun on his face. The French philosopher Gabriel Marcel was a contemporary of Camus who took the opposite metaphysical position. He was a committed Catholic, but he nonetheless articulated something that shone a light in the same place as Camus. Marcel distinguished between having and being. Having is the mode of the consumer, the person who relates to the world by acquiring things, by converting experience into possession, and by turning life into a collection. They define themselves by the things they've achieved, the places they've been and the people they've met along the way. Telling the story this way is already a performance. Being is the mode of authentic presence, the person who is fully there in the encounter, who gives themselves to it rather than extracting something from it. Meursault, for all his apparent passivity, is always in the mode of being. He's not interested in collecting because he wants to experience. He's not interested in performing because he doesn't want to miss the show. He's perpetually joyful, which gives his life the kind of great meaning we all should hope for. Our culture exists squarely in the mode of having. We collect experiences for the image they produce and for the content they generate, endlessly commodifying our lives and our stories in the hope of social recognition. We go to places for the photograph. We attend events for the story we might tell our friends or colleagues afterward. We chase relationships that aren't good for us because they're good for social media. In the process, we're missing out on living. The real encounter is a distant memory, and most of us have never heard the world speak. The good news is that all we have to do is listen, to open ourselves up and take it all in. The bad news is that when we take the picture, we miss the sunset. Camus is asking us to put the camera down. Near the end of the novel, Meursault finally allows himself to face what he's been circling around all his life. The chaplain leaves and the rage passes through him like a storm. As he lies there looking at the stars, he feels the world's indifference, and it feels more like a blanket than a sentence. The universe doesn't care about Meursault, or any of us for that matter. This is why the priest wants him to convert, to transform into God's caring through faith. But Meursault won't, and in his unwillingness to convert, he receives something the priest can't offer. The world as it actually is. Indifferent, yes, but also present. It can offer him a different kind of comfort in its stars and its silence. It can give him the gift of his own unrepeatable life, and everything that is actually available to a human being. We live in a moment that has made the priest era more attractive than ever. We can curate our content, optimize our feed, construct a digital environment that reflects back to us exactly the world we want to inhabit. Meaningful, ordered, filled with the right kind of significance, and insulated from the cold ambiguity of the real. And we're doing it at scale, with great ingenuity and absolutely no idea what we're giving up. We're losing the capacity to open ourselves, and that's something we can learn from Meursault. The capacity to be truly embarrassingly present to the real world. To encounter the world rather than curating it. To accept its joys and its tragedies. To live our lives instead of performing them, and to receive that gentle indifference. Camus' existentialism is not the one of anxiety, made heavy with the burdens of self-creation and freedom. It's the existentialism of the open window, the philosophy that invites authenticity and allows you to hear what the world has to say to you specifically. Even for a man on death row, that's enough. But it's harder than it sounds. It will ask you to give up the comfort of the narrative, the security of the performance, and the smooth management of your experiences that civilization has been patiently building for centuries. Ultimately, it requires vulnerability, the willingness to let the world reach inside your heart, but the reward on the other side is magnificent. Meursault finds it in his prison cell, looking at the stars on the night before his execution. It's more complex than happiness. It's something older, stranger, and much more fulfilling. It's the feeling of being really alive, of noticing the astonishing fact of your own existence and accepting it for the great gift that it is. It's what the sun on your face actually feels like, when you stop running away from it and just let it land.